5 classic Mercedes you never see anywhere anymore. I was perusing Craigslist, and sometimes I go on Craigslist and I just look to see what's for sale. You know, I'll do a nationwide Craigslist search and I'll see if certain cars are for sale. And it's funny because a lot of the cars that we used to see everywhere in the 80s, if you go on Craigslist and actually try to find examples of those cars, there just aren't any. If you want to look for something like a Nissan Pulsar or you know, a Daihatsu Rocky or Charade, or even a Daewoo or a 1989 Pontiac Le Mans. I mean, these are all junk throwaway cars, you know. Some of them were pretty good, but they still had some planned obsolescence built into them, so they didn't last. And they're just not anywhere. Now, other cars sort of died inglorious deaths at the hands of their owners because they were almost too well made. They were so well made that people took for granted they wouldn't break until they broke. And these cars include the Volvo 100 series, which is an extremely well-made car. The Saab 900. It's like, when did you last see a Saab 900 when you were out driving? Cars that just had incredible build quality characteristics, but where parts availability and owner thriftiness and some other problems sort of conspired to take them off the road. And then there are some other cars that you see quite frequently. Like, it's not that uncommon to see a Toyota Cressida driving around. You know, it's not that uncommon to see a Mercedes 123 or 126 series on the road either. Nor is it that uncommon to see something like a 1980s or 90s Ford Bronco. And a lot of these cars have become more popular because they were so popular for so long, and then they went away, and then people started digging garages and backyards for them and started putting them back on the road. So today we're going to look at 5 Mercedes models that were ubiquitous cars. They were everywhere. They were all over the road. You see them in pictures from the 70s. You see them you saw them just about everywhere, and then in like one fell swoop they just sort of disappeared. So the first car in that list that we're going to start with is the W111 Fintail sedan, the Fintail, the 230S or 220S. Now, these cars were extremely popular in the 1970s and 80s. You know, in the 1960s, Mercedes sold quite a few of them. Then interest in this model died when the 108 came out, when the 280 SE came out, especially because the 280 SE and 280 SE 4.5 were such good cars. And oddly enough, you know, if you're in the right area, I'm not talking about like, you know, if you're in Springfield, Illinois or something, but I mean, if you're in the right area, you know, if you're in in the right part of Atlanta or Dallas or the Hamptons or something, you'll see somebody driving one of these W108 280 SEs around, but you won't really see the W111 version with the tail fins anywhere. You won't see them at auctions or car shows either. You know, you could say, well, you know, people do occasionally see them for sale on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, and that's true. There are some survivors, but you really don't see operational examples of the 111 or its smaller counterpart, the 110, and especially the upmarket counterpart, the W112. And the W112 was always rare, but the 111 was not. So the next car on our list, transitioning to the next car on our list, we're going to look at the W114 and 115. So we're going to look specifically at cars that were really common, and some of these really common cars included the 220D, the 280, the 280C, the 250 was pretty common, you know, and you just don't see a lot of these cars anymore. Now, I remember about 15 years ago you would see them, and then they started popping up, you know, en masse in wrecking yards. Probably about 25 years ago, a lot of people junked these cars, unfortunately, without really thinking twice about it, because at the time they didn't appreciate the idea of a repairable car. You know, they hadn't been confronted with the message of your VIN number does not match your control module number or something like that. But It's really unfortunate because the 114 and 115 series were the backbones of many societies in developing countries. In Lebanon, the 115 was like the only car really that people cared about. It was the car to have. You know, you couldn't really go for more than a minute or two without seeing one of these things. And so, you know, the whole problem with these cars was that they were predisposed to rust. And I find that the second generation 114 and 115, the cars with the bigger bumpers and the full window and the ribbed tail lights and the 240D, 300D, 280, 280C, 230-4. These cars are really scarce. The first generation of 114 and 115s, those cars looked just classic enough to where some people really saved them, particularly cars like the 220D, which always ran. Not saying there are a bunch of them, but there are still some out there that are decent. And the 250C, which is just an incredibly beautiful car to look at. But you look for things like a 280C or a 280, and it's like, where are they? We used to see these things everywhere. When I was growing up, when I was a kid, they were everywhere. They were in and out of my dad's shop all the time. So what happened to these cars? You know, where are they? Now, the third car on the list that we're going to look at, of course, is the W116. There used to be a lot of 116s everywhere, particularly 450 SELs. There were also a lot of 300 SDs, but a car that I remember growing up quite frequently was the 450 SEL. And if you look at other Mercedes from this era, notably the 107 or 1977 to 79 123 series cars, and there still seem to be a decent amount of them out there, it's weird and odd and disappointing that the 116 kind of disappeared. And of course, Mercedes sort of wrote the epitaph of the 116 when they released the 126. But the 126, you know, in and of itself was superseded by its second generation, the 420 and 560 SEL, which kind of doomed the first generation of gasoline 126s to the same status as the 116. So the 116 in the United States is a fairly upmarket car. Unfortunately, they had their share of corrosion issues too, but if you look hard, you can still see them. It's just often the restoration work needed to bring one up to par discourages a lot of people, or they just don't have the means or the knowledge or understanding to get it done. So the cars either get worse when people do discover them and start driving them, or they never get put back on the road, or they sort of get half repaired to where they're in a semi-operational state, and then the buck gets passed to the next owner. But it's really quite unfortunate because the 116 in some ways was a superior car to the 126. It was a stronger car. It had a stronger shell. Some people say that it had better seats and better ride quality, which I do kind of agree with in many ways. It was a more classic looking car, so it had a better appearance, and it had better, I would say better ergonomics. So I feel like I have more room inside a 116 than a 126. Now, the fourth car on our list that people used to really, I think really, we used to see tons of these cars, there aren't that many anymore, is the W201, the 190, particularly 1989 and earlier cars. We used to work on and service a lot of 201s. And this is even before my business is fully developed. And now when you see them, a lot of these early 201s have kind of died, you know, and they sort of died a premature death because, again, there was a period of time like around 2010 to 2012. And there I remember seeing a lot of these cars in junkyards. Now, why? Why was that? Was it cash for clunkers? I don't think so. Maybe. But it pointed to a bigger problem with the 201, and that's that it had a significant number of planned obsolescence details. And I particularly didn't like some aspects of the 201, but overall, I still think it was a much better car than its predecessor, the 202. And it's funny because the 202 has become just as uncommon as the 201 in some areas. There's still more of them out there, but you know, only marginally, and only because I think the 202 is a better seller than the 201. Now we're going to get to the last Mercedes on our list. And I think that you guys will be really shocked to know what this one is. And for the last car on our list, we have gasoline engine variants of the 123. I bet you guys didn't see that coming. So from 1977 to 81, so most of the first generation, and then the first like year and a half of the second generation 123 cars were built as the 230, and then the 280E, the 280CE. These were the three gas-engined 123s. So the 230 was only sold in 77 and 78. And it was not the hottest seller, but it was still a relatively durable car. And I even had one of these, and it was a good car. And it's unfortunate because absolutely no one took care of these. They were very rare. And nowadays, when we do see one, it's usually kind of in miserable condition because of some of the durability issues with things like interiors and body rust proofing that the 123 series had. But the car that I think mostly about is the 280E and 280CE. It's extremely rare to see a 280E these days. It's also just about as rare to see a 280CE, and we're talking about US market versions. A lot of things that I think negatively affected these cars were the complication and probably the difficulty of maintenance and repair of the M110 engine, particularly if it had a problem with a camshaft or a problem with a cylinder head or an oil consumption issue. Also, the fact that the 123 300D turbo diesel was a better car, so many people who had 280Es eventually bought 300D turbos. But also because when the market kind of collapsed for the 123 series in the mid-90s, people started buying 280Es and CEs for next to nothing. They were $1,500 to $2,000 cars. And that was, about 1995, 96. So people would go and buy, a 77, 78 280E for, with 150 to 180,000 miles on it and just finish it off within a few years. And so by the year 2000, there just weren't that many of them left. So anyway, this is sort of an unfortunate thing, when you juxtapose these to 107s of all models, 123 diesels, 126 diesels, second generation 126 gasoline engine variants, the W108 series cars, the W113 series cars. All these cars sort of float to the top. And the reason I made this video is because maybe if one of you has one of these cars in your garage or is thinking about buying one or restoring one, you'll give it additional thought, knowing that these cars just aren't as common as they used to be. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this video. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you want more great Mercedes comment and thought-provoking dialogue about why certain cars are worth saving. We'll talk to you in the future.